Hi everyone, this is Module 0, Day 3 on the distributive property. And the name distributive property comes from the word distribute. So to distribute something is to spread something out to a group or to pass something out. So think of it like this. If we were in a classroom and I had a worksheet, I could distribute the worksheet, meaning pass one out to each person. Now the distributive property is a math property that basically does that with multiplication. It takes a multiplication problem and it distributes it out. So instead of taking a 10 and just multiplying it by one thing, you might multiply it by 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things. So the way you're going to recognize distributive property in a math problem, I said here, it's usually looks something like this. You're going to have a single term. It could just be a number like 3. And then after that number comes something else in parentheses. So first of all, quick reminder, whenever two things are stuck together in a math equation with no sign in between them, it means multiply. Even something as simple as 10x. 10x actually means 10 times x, because you're just taking the 10 and the x and you're sticking them together. So that's a math rule for equations. Whenever you have two things stuck together, it's multiplication. So if you think about that example I just gave you, I had a 3, and then in parentheses I had a 2x plus 5, and there was no sign in between them. It didn't say 3 plus 2x plus 5, or 3 divided by 2x plus 5. They were just stuck together, and what that means is 3 times 2x plus 5. Now, once you realize that, this is where the distribute part comes in, of the distributive property. If I'm going to multiply 3 times 2x plus 5, I'm going to take the 3 and I'm going to distribute it to each of those two things. And when I distribute it, each one will become a multiplying problem. So let's go ahead and just multiply this one out. And I'll show you, a lot of people on a distributive property question like to show their work this way. They say, I'm going to take the 3 and I'm going to distribute it to the 2x and I'm going to distribute it to the 5. So they use those little two arrows to kind of show their work. What they're really doing is this. They're doing 3 times 2x, and I use the x symbol for times. I probably shouldn't. In fact, let's erase that because it looks confusing with the x in the problem. I'll use the other symbol for multiplication, the dot. 3 times 2x, and then that symbol in the middle, the plus, stays there. And then for the second part, you have 3 times 5. And that's what the two little blue arrows are. The first blue arrow shows me multiplying 3 times 2x. I leave the plus from the middle, and the second blue arrow shows me doing 3 times 5. So for my final answer, 3 times 2x would be 6x, because 3 times 2 is 6, and there's an x in there, we'll basically just leave it, plus, and then 3 times 5 is 15. So that's how the distributive property works. You're taking one single thing and you are distributing it or passing it out or spreading it out to however many things there are inside the parentheses. And each time it goes into one of the parts, it's a multiplication problem. All right, so let's do this. Let's combine the last two things we've done in class. Here we have a solve for x, and we are going to solve the equation for x. But what I did is I mixed the distributive property into it. This is what I meant when I said we're going to do our last two things we've learned in one problem. We're solving for x, which is what we did in the last lesson, but we're using the distributive property to do it. So my very first step here, let's do the distributive property. As soon as I see that 2 out in front of or stuck to a set of parentheses, I think I'm going to do a distributive property. I'm going to multiply it here and multiply it here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump straight to the multiplied parts. Instead of on the last slide I showed you in two different steps, I said 2 times 5x plus 2 times 3. Let's just do the multiplying. 2 times 5x is 10x. The plus stays in the middle. 2 times 3 is 6. And we'll leave the other side of the equation, equals 41. Now, for the rest of the equation, we're basically doing yesterday's lesson. We are isolating x. So let me switch colors here. We are isolating x. I want to get that x by itself. So the first thing I want to get rid of is the 6. Let's subtract 6 from both sides. That leaves me with 10x here. The 6's are gone. 41 minus 6 would be 35. And we will finish. We have one more step. We'll divide both sides by 10. Because remember, 10x means 10 times x. And if I want to cancel out the 10 and isolate the x, I divide. So we did that. We canceled out those 10s. X equals, now what you notice is this does not go evenly. Our answer is going to be a decimal here, or a fraction. We'll go with a decimal. 35 divided by 10 is not a nice even number. But you don't need a calculator for this one. You shouldn't, because dividing by 10 or multiplying by 10 is just moving a decimal. That's another good thing for you guys to remember. If I do 35 divided by 10, I'm just moving the decimal one spot back, and my final answer is 3.5. All right, so that's the distributive property applied to what we did yesterday, solving equations.